Hello and welcome to a new episode of Talking Teaching with Criminologists with me, John Shute, and
me, Helen Nichols.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about a general issue and some specifics within that, which is, a central part of, I suppose, literally every undergraduate criminology degree offered in Britain, and an important component of master's degrees, particularly MScs and MRSs, and that is the teaching of quantitative methods and statistics in particular. So why is it important to teach these skills? What are the pedagogic demands in terms of the initial attitudes towards the subject matter from students, the status of stats and quants within British criminology, and what are the rewards of doing so as well for staff and for students? Now, there are various ways into this, but as a case study, I thought I would bring in my fine colleagues from the University of Manchester Criminology Department. Other departments, other degrees are available, I should say. But I've been at Manchester for a while now, and though it's a while since I've done it, I did teach statistics. And then I saw my great colleagues Juanjo Medina and Reika Soimosi really develop and change the way that we do things, bringing in R and open source program and so forth as the basis for what we do, rejigging the pedagogy. And we have some of the fruits of that here with three colleagues of mine who teach quants in various ways on a range of programs. So I'd like you all, if you would, to introduce yourselves. Welcome, obviously. Could you say a little bit about who you are, what you teach, what your research interests are, to give a sense of the diversity of what we teach at Manchester? David, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, John and Helen, for inviting us to this podcast. It's great to be here, sharing some experiences, and also make sure to listen to all the next podcasts after hours once they are published. So yeah, my name is David Buil. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Criminology, and broadly speaking, my areas of interest cover the application of quant methods to criminological problems, and more specifically trying to understand how we collect and analyze data about crime. So let's say my focus of analysis is crime data and how we use it to build theories of crime and deviance. And I've been involved in the teaching of quant methods within the department in a couple of modules so far. So later on, I guess we can talk a little bit about the curriculum and how it's structured within our undergrad. But I'm teaching Making Sense of Criminological Data, which is an introduction to Excel and VIVO. So we blend both qual and quants together in the same module in computer lab environments. So students get to know how to open crime data, and for now in Excel. Later on, they will learn how to do that in our software. And I've also been involved in the short dissertation quants pathway, and that's at the end of their third year, when they apply everything they have learned in previous modules to do their short dissertations, applying quants data analysis to secondary data. Yeah, and now I will let my two colleagues talk a little bit.
Ian, do you want to go next? Thanks, David.
So my name is Ian, and thank you, Helen and John, inviting us again. And then I am I'm using computational criminological method, and apply the problem that we need to answer in the current criminological question. For instance, how many police officers do we need? How many resources do we need? Those kind of answered could be answered. Those kind of questions could be answered by the new data-driven, new quantitative method and the new computational method. That's the area that I'm interested in. And then I'm currently teaching 3 modules in the department: statistic model for undergrad and a statistic model for postgrad. And I also teach crime mapping using GIS, R technique, and for undergrad and postgrad students.
Great. Many thanks, Ian. Thomas.
Okay, well, I will be repetitive a little bit and at the beginning because I also want to thank Helen and John for the invitation and for having the opportunity to be here. I'm really happy to be here and I feel honored in that way. So hopefully I will not disappoint. I also have to apologize for sort of tainting the criminological purity here because I am primarily a social network scholar, and my main area of application of social network analysis is criminology, criminal networks. But that does not end there. I also do a fair amount of work in educational networks, epidemiological networks, or political networks, for instance. And this also relates to my teaching. So my teaching is mostly focused on postgrad taught students in terms of teaching data analysis with R, and then taking a little bit here and there in teaching general social network analysis methods or statistical models for network analysis, also to other students beyond criminology.
Great. Excellent. Well, we get a good sense of your interests and the type of things that we're teaching at Manchester. Then, would you say there's anything distinctive about what we do at Manchester compared to where things are offered elsewhere, or do we offer quite a similar program to other areas?
If I can jump in, I'm not very familiar with all other programs across the UK, right? I think that content-wise, it's probably similar in that students learn how to open a database with regards to Quant's method, of course, how to open criminological data coming from police data and victimization surveys primarily, and how to analyze this using descriptive statistics and some sort of regression analysis. I think that's quite standard across programs. What is probably different, and I say probably because I'm not sure about that, is that we use fully open source software. So students learn to do data analysis in R so that when they finish their programs, they can keep using it throughout their careers. Either if they go to the public sector, they can keep using open software from their own devices. And if they go to the private sector, they can do that as well. Even if they decide to go self-employed and create their own companies in the future, they can keep using this type of software because there's no license associated with it. And also something that we are trying to do, and I don't know if we're being very successful at this or not, is trying to blend qual and quant teaching together. So students finish each of these modules knowing a bit of both and how these two approaches can complement each other.
Great. Thanks. And also I think just the way that Tomas and Ian set up their research interests, talked about computational methods and SNA. I mean, I guess there's a difference between the research interests and the backgrounds of the people who teach stats and what you're actually able to teach within the curriculum. But I also have always got the sense that, the particular skill set that we bring to this, and also links with, say, the Cathy Marsh Centre for Social Statistics is also something that's quite distinctive about what we do. But anyway, this is not so much about my understanding of the world as yours. Let's move on to some more general questions then, and start with a very simple but I think really important one. Is why is it important for students of criminology to learn about statistics and data science? And if there's a diffusion of responsibility, because we've got three excellent guests, then just dive in and it'll be all
okay.
good.
So can I start with a little bit of a mantra, and then I'll leave the floor open to Eon and to David to actually come up with a bit more interesting and profound answers. Because my mantra that I've been going around in our department and in my work is that I actually think teaching data scientific or data analytic modules and skills, more importantly, so I would emphasize skills rather than modules, is that it is a part of general sort of information / scientific literacy. That's not only a thing that's important for being able to do good criminological research or to write good papers or write a solid dissertation and find a good employment, but it's a general skill set that I think is very important for people to be sort of active participants and active citizens in 21st century. And given that we're sort of data overloaded, there's never been this much data in the world around us and this much unstructured information flowing around us in everyday life. I think having skills that at least somehow allow you to grasp this absolute tsunami of information that you face on a daily basis is not sufficient, but a necessary condition in sort of being a good, responsible human who can navigate around today's world.
That's a very elegantly and wonderfully put a case, I think, there. Eon, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Why do you think it's important to be teaching these things?
So actually, I wanted to talk about the method part, the previous question, the flipped teaching. So can I say something a little bit about the flipped teaching and why we are implementing that one, and then Helen can add it back. So one of the unique part of our teaching is the flipped teaching. So this is Quano and Reka introduced to the department, and then we and all other quantitative method module, we are following their introduced method. So this is so for someone who's not that familiar with what is flipped teaching, it's pedagogical approach. So, changing the traditional classroom structure of the teaching. So this is a scientifically approved. So which means like students, not rather than in traditional style lecture teaching in front of students, leading the session for 2 hours. What we are doing is the students have a lot of preps. So before they come to the quantitative research method class, they watch the video recorded by the colleagues, and then they fully prepared, and then they come to the classroom, and then they use the class time to work on problems and activity, and ask a question and get help from the teacher, and then discuss with the colleague. So I think this is kind of unique part of the teaching method in our department, and then we found this is quite successful. And of course, we face kind of some challenges, like David mentioned, is open sourced, and then so we try to keep updated with the new data set and try to fix it like every year. It's quite demanding work. There's a lot of work followed, but it's worth it. And also in all teaching quantitative module, we try to use open source data set. So rather than providing some like secure data, or rather than students download data from our archive, students go to the website and go to their own, go to the outside of data source and download data and utilize data. So they learn more benefit from, we believe they learn more things from there. So that would be the kind of unique part in our quantitative method in our department.
Great, and that also seems to me to build on Tomas's point there, that you're empowering students in a way as well, to not only have the skills to interrogate data, but get hold of good quality data that is produced with open science principles behind it as well, and to understand the value of that. Thanks very much, David. Anything you'd like to add about why it's important to get these skills to students?
So I'll build a little bit on Tomas' point, and then I'll also mention, the other important part, which is employability for students. So I agree that it's super important for students to apply quant methods to every other aspect of their lives. And a couple of weeks ago, I met a student that was planning her master's dissertation, and she told me that she had put together a Gantt chart, structured, she had coded the Gantt chart in R, applying some of the skills that she had learned with us during the previous year. So it's not only you can not only apply quant and data coding and data analysis to analyze crime data, but also to any other aspects of your life, and also to understanding stats. And so it's not only about actively producing analysis, but also learning how to interpret analysis regarding any aspect of life, right? As Tomas was saying, when you read in the news, the popularity of Boris Johnson is going down. What does it actually mean? So we all kind of know what it means, but where do this data come from? How it was recorded? How does the Guardian end up concluding this? So I think those skills stay with students forever, regardless of what they do in the future. And regarding what they do in the future, I think there's quite a lot of research done that providing quant skills to students enhances their employability across different sectors of government, public sector, and also for those of them that want to develop their own companies and business in the future. It also provides them with a key skill set. So yeah, it's good for employability, but it's also good to be a good citizen and a good criminologist.
Yes, that's so true, because when if their students came to me and say, I hate statistics, I don't know why I have to learn this, I always said, well, it will increase your employability. So you can easily find a job now, because all other department, corrections or police, they hire a lot of people who can manage data, who can understand data analysis and can handle these kind of tools. So it will increase students' employability, and then we also have a Q-Step program. So after second year, students can apply for a Q-Step internship. So it's really, really competitive, but it's really great opportunity. Students go there and they're working with the real people, and then still get a support from the university, and then build some network, and they're learning how the data really works in the real world. So we try to link it with how it really works in the real world, how students can get this skill when they're graduate, and then use it as good, put something on their CV, and then they can increase their employability overall.
Great. I'm glad you brought up the Q-Step there, and we've had quite a lot of success with criminology students getting onto those placements. These are placements, with often government departments, helping out with, as Ian says, with real world problems, with real world data, and that's a really sort of valuable unpaid internship, I should add as well, which they should all be really. So yeah, that's you make a compelling case collectively there, guys. So thanks for that. Now, here's a broader, a big question actually, but I'd be interested in your take on it. What do you see as the status of quants and statistics within British criminology specifically? I mean, it's clearly something that you're building and contributing to through your own work, but also through your teaching. But a caricature might be that, well, quants and quantitative sociological sort of approaches are big in sort of in North America. There are centers of expertise and networks within Europe. I see quite a lot of strong quant papers coming out of the Netherlands, for example, and collaborations there. There are areas of strength in the global south. But British criminology, I don't know, there are clearly some wonderful scholars contributing and getting those papers out into the main journals. But a caricature might be that we still have a strong tradition of more critical sociological interests within British criminology that has sometimes been quite antithetical, or seen positivist approaches used in a pejorative sense as being kind of quite determinist or antithetical, or sort of losing the sort of point about what criminology is supposed to be. So do you see that? Do you feel as though British criminology is embracing quantitative methods more in your time working at Manchester?
So if I may go first, because my answer will be very brief, and this is solely due to the fact that I'm still relatively new to the UK, and especially to British criminology and the UK system overall in terms of how universities are managed and built in here. But I have a PhD from the Netherlands, so I will offer only my comparison and I would say rather myopic and rather biased comparison between the two countries. And so for me, what you said, John, about the fact that the Netherlands is very strong and very deeply rooted in this quantitative sort of positivist leaning tradition is, in my opinion, a very correct assessment. And in that comparison, I think it's also very correct, again, given my rather limited experience, that the British criminology and the overall British approach is a little bit more leaning towards the critical one. That's perhaps more similar in that sense to French approach to social sciences and humanities, rather than sort of the North American or the sort of Dutch/German one. If we can even classify that on the basis of the sort of national traditions. And in that sense, I think for me, at the very least, it's very interesting to work in the UK now because it feels like there's a lot to be done. And in a sense, there's a lot of uncharted territory and a lot of opportunities to actually promote what we're doing and what we think is useful or meaningful in terms of research methodology. Whereas in the Netherlands, no matter how I love the country and the educational and scientific system there, it's fairly limited because it's just so strongly and deeply rooted.
Great. Would you like to add anything, David, Ian?
You can go first, Ian, if you want.
Well, mine is not like really big to person. I couldn't find any like I can't say anything like Tom said, but my when I get this question, my answer was that it's a different perspective. First of all, so it created different interest in the quantitative, how to utilize the quantitative method, and the second one is data availability. So compare with the US, and David and I were working on the similar paper about the credibility and the privacy in the data issue. So here in UK, it's really hard to get the data. Like there's a lot of process overall. So, but compare with America, it's like you can easily access all those kind of detailed data, or especially like the location data or personal information level data. So here in UK, personally, I found the data, the quality of data I get normally is quite, it's not easy to get a good quality data. So it's one the factors I've personally felt very different compared with other countries.
Okay. David, you agree then?
But my take on that is that it's not too bad. Everything I've learned about quant methods applied to criminology, I've learned, well, not everything, let's say 70% of it, I've learned it in the UK. And so there's a few researchers based in different organizations doing very, very interesting work in top-level publications and getting, widely cited and having impact in everyday decisions within government and policy. So I think it's not too bad. And I think that criminology is on this weird intersection between sociology, law, psychology, and I think that most quant work has historically been done in the psychological aspects of criminology, but now we're also getting close to two other disciplines, economics and geography, that are very quant-driven. So I think that it will only increase the amount of quant research in the criminology discipline as we get closer and closer to economics and geography. And I don't know if that's good or bad, just describing what my experience is so far. So I'm not very critical with the state of the art of quantitative British criminology.
Great, thanks very much, guys. You mentioned psychology there, which sort of brings me on to the next or the final question. Again, a broad question before Helen starts to talk a bit more about the pedagogy. Building on what Ian's already said about how you teach quants and stats and get over some of the challenges in that. But I started off my career and I did most of my I used to think of myself as primarily a quant researcher in the mid to late 90s and through the 2000s. I started off in psychology with a degree in experimental psychology and teaching stats. Now that's quite straightforward, because the randomization and the particular sort of paradigm of experiments does a lot of the work for you. Psychologists are interested in continuous measure outcomes, and so everything's parametric and lovely, and it's a fairly straightforward, secure sort of science, notwithstanding the replication crisis within that particular discipline. But then when I moved into criminology, and particularly development and life cost stuff, I started to be exposed to my view, really exciting, more exotic statistics. So multi-level models. I got really interested in compositional and contextual effects, area effects. There's some of the late 90s stuff, Raudenberg, Bush, Sampson and Earls, the Chicago development for criminal careers, and that really interesting stuff about how at an area level, yes, concentrated disadvantage is important for driving the levels of violence. in a community, but collective efficacy, which you could map at the area level, was also important contextually. I thought that was completely fascinating. I thought multi-level methods, hierarchical linear modeling, whatever you want to use, ML-Win at that time, was fascinating. I also got really into the Nagin et al. Sort of idea about, growth trajectory, growth curve modeling, and that kind of thing. And then propensity score matching, and that which took me back to the sort of idea of experimental psychology, but finding these groups within your bigger data sets. And I was compelled by these methods because I thought they were really quite smart and sophisticated, but also I thought they were really good at persuasively testing different hypotheses that supported or rejected particular camps of theory and said that these particular ideas were particularly well suited to these particular problems. Now, that sophistication and that sort of joy that I got from that engagement always contrasted slightly with the teaching of statistics, particularly to undergraduates, because you know that it's difficult to get across that sense of sophistication when you have to get through the basic business of this is what data is, these are what descriptive statistics are, this is what a correlation is, these are the limitations, and let us edge you towards some regression analysis, but know that we can't really do that much during the undergraduate degree, or even sometimes at the postgraduate level. So I think my question is, do you experience frustrations in teaching the basics and doing that well, knowing that there's a world out there of statistical methods, or is there just a joy in setting somebody off on that road towards understanding quant methods?
I can go first now.
Please do.
I say that the word joy associated with teaching quant methods is a bit hard. I wouldn't describe it with that specific word. But I think it's necessary, and I think it's impossible not to do it in this way, right? Like you cannot start to build a house from the roof. And I think that it's good that all students learn those very basics about statistics. What is data? What is a database? What's a variable? What's an observation? And those things can seem boring, but are the foundations of everything, right? And then the few students that are very much interested in quants, that are very much interested in research, and that are very much interested in advancing our understanding of crime and deviance, they will learn how to develop and apply all those methods in the future if they want to do so, right? So I don't think we need 100% of students in criminology to understand latent growth models. I mean, it would be ideal if that was the case, but I don't think society needs that, or criminology needs that for that matter. But I think society needs that everyone understand what a sample and what's a p-value, which is these foundational levels. So I don't experience joy, but I don't experience frustration either. That's my answer.
Okay.
And if I can add a comment / sort of a tangential observation to what David has said, I feel so. I also don't really experience frustration, or at least not most of the time, and I have occasional bursts of joy. So that's and I find that really nice whenever it happens. But what I think is a good way how to approach sort of getting across to people who are primarily not interested in quants, but in the substance matter. So they want to know about crime, deviance, law, and all these other issues. And the methodology is sort of just a vessel how to then obtain or generate new knowledge or understand the one that is being produced currently. And I think there it's really about framing, and there may be, at least it may seem so, there may be an element of deception in a sense, because if we frame quantitative methodology and learning data analytic skills as statistics, and this is what you had your math on in high school, and now that we are going to build up on that, and we're going to use equations, and it's going to be tough, so buckle up. Then we're necessarily losing already at that point a lot of the students. And so my again, very humble, very myopic, very biased experience with teaching, for instance, network analysis in the context of criminology, is that if it is not framed as a formal or quantitative approach, but just an approach that can help us understand relations and interactions among individuals or any sort of entities, really, then all of a sudden, all these barriers go aside and students approach that with sort of open mind, in the sense of not falling for the desperation that they're all of a sudden going to encounter some horrible Greek symbols and letters that strike fear into the heart of all mortals, which I am sure they do, because it happens to me regularly every now and then. And then, so if you really frame it as something that's not primarily quant or qual, but rather it's a research method, or it's a perspective, a tool that can help you grasp a particular part of aspect of the reality that you're looking at, I think there's a statistically significant and positive effect in what it will yield as a result in terms of adoption of those methods by the students. I hope that made sense.
Very much so. Thanks, Tomas. Eon, anything you'd like to add before we move on?
So overall, like a teaching quantitative method is not like it's very difficult, because students, first of all, students not really interested in learning quantitative method, and then second of all, the quantitative method, we understand it's really hard to learn. It's not easy method, and it's really time-consuming work. And the students who does not have any background or knowledge, or not familiar with the numbers, they feel quite like scary, and then really worried when they join the session.
But let's move away from the frustrations to the how we and how at Manchester we deal with some of the challenges and overcome them. And Helen, if I can hand over to you to take that side of things.
I did have a thought that it's almost like you feel the need to deliver it backwards and maybe show students the end products, like here are the possibilities of what can be achieved, you know, by using these and exploring these methods, which at the outset might seem really frightening, but if you can stay with me and learn these skills, then we can get to this really interesting stuff. So it's almost like having to show you know, the results and conclusions before you actually you know, start at the basics. So that was just kind of my thought, is maybe we do this backwards to get that enthusiasm. And I'll be totally honest, I would level with you, I have taught quants in the past, and very basic quants, so that's kind of the only part of teaching quants that I'm able to comment on. So that's probably all I have to offer. I'm just learning so much from what you guys are saying. And another thing before I ask the question, which is just a thought that some people either listening to this as a podcast or watching it as a podcast might be thinking, is that there might be, you know, a good reason to show this podcast to students, because these kind of conversations, we don't necessarily have space in our, you know, in our teaching time to talk to students about this stuff. And that's part of what I was thinking when I was listening to what you were all saying, was I think students would really like to hear this when you were talking about why it's good for their employability and the examples that you gave, and the reason why it is something to be excited about, and why you should, you know, persevere with the stuff that kind of looks quite frightening. So I do think some people, and I will be sharing this with colleagues, may want to show this to their students, which again I think is great as developing this as a resource. So the question that I wanted to start with, and I suppose it does build on from what John was saying before, is around the challenge of building statistical literacy amongst criminology students. And you mentioned when you were responding to John previously, which I think is probably at the forefront of all of our minds, about fear. So that is already kind of clear from what you've said already. But I wondered if you could tease out a bit more some of the other challenges that come with building that statistical literacy among students. Whoever wants to go first. I should have nominated someone, but I really don't want to pick on anybody in case this is like not their question.
I can just say that building on what Eon mentioned before about the way each of the weeks is structured in the teaching curriculum, I think and I can explain it again before I build on that. Each week when students show up in class in the computer lab session, they have already learned the conceptual framework for what they are about to learn in the methodological side of things. So if they are expected to come to class and learn, and I will mention very basic examples, right? How to calculate an average and the standard deviation. They already know what's an average and a standard deviation from watching videos and learning teaching materials before showing up. And so it's a bit on them, right? If they want to come prepared, they will come prepared. If they want to come less prepared, they will be less prepared, but we still give them a chance to learn all those skills in the computer lab session. That's once they show up in the computer lab environment, we give them data with instructions, written instructions that are also available online, and they just need to follow the instructions to apply those conceptual frameworks that they have learned before to real world cases and obtain their own conclusions. And then once they have done that, we ask them to go home and we give them some homework. And the homework is usually apply the very same steps to a different data set. So they need to learn those skills and apply them to a different problem to make sure that they understand what they are doing. Sometimes we add some small changes in the data set and how it's constructed. So they also need to be a little bit imaginative or approach the problem with a creative approach. And then on Fridays, they again show up in class and we have a one-to-one interaction, a very quick one-to-one interaction. It's usually 1 hour in which we do a live demonstration on how those homework should have been addressed. So I think the way this structure allows both very keen students to do each of those parts on time and then show up on Friday, haven't learned everything, but also it allows those students that are not that keen, that are probably a little bit scared of statistics, or they don't really see the point, and they have 4 chances to learn that. They can do it at home before the computer lab session. During the computer lab session, they can become interested while they are doing the exercise. They can become probably a little bit more interested when applying this on their own time to a different problem, or then on Fridays when they show up in the feedback session, and they can learn both the concept and the method again. So we're providing each of the students loads of opportunities to get on board and learn all those important skills, right? So there's no more we can do, right? We could create a 5th session on Saturday, but we are going to be tired and we don't want to.
I don't know if anybody would tell, if I'm honest. I wouldn't hold your breath. Did anyone else want to add on to that? The challenges beyond, the kind of the fear.
So if I may add a thing to it, because I think we've been circling around one sort of particularly painful part, and maybe even literally painful part in learning quantitative methods and mathematics and statistics or subjects related to it. And so we've been circling around that issue for a while now in a lot of our answers and comments in here. And that is that this is usually perceived and experienced as something that's not very pleasant, to say the least, by the students. And there's, in fact, perhaps not yet strongly established, but an emerging evidence that there are real feelings connected with anxiety or other psychological discomfort related to learning about these things. So statistical anxiety is actually a real thing in a way, and it's related to, under fMRI scans, it's related to centers that are usually engaged when we are feeling pain. So it's literally something that can be a pain. And now, so without further ado, this was kind of a seeming detour. Anyway, so what I think is important is to acknowledge that much like any other skill that humans can learn, this is something that will not happen overnight and without the effort, without the person-hours investment into this. And much like any other skills, be it sort of speaking foreign languages or learning a musical instrument, there may be a very awkward, very difficult beginnings with steep learning curve at the start. And what I would sort of suggest, and I think that that's the main issue with the sort of disconnect, the sort of epistemological chasm between teachers and students in quantitative classrooms, is that we as teachers presumably do that research and teach it because we enjoy it and we understand it to some sort of degree, and therefore we feel like that's something we have already mastered to a certain extent. But we have to try and put ourselves back into the shoes of people who actually haven't come across these things and who may feel even a little bit anxious or a little bit afraid of coming across these skills and across these problems. And I would really say that what we should do is to be very open and explicit about this, that this may be very difficult at times, and it may be sort of something where you actually have to sit through the exercises, the labs. You have to go through the materials and through the readings and videos, much like you have to sort of learn your scales and your chords when you're learning a music instrument, or much like you have to learn your vocabulary and grammar if you want to speak a foreign language before you actually become a bit adept in applying these things. And trying to pretend like, oh, we all know all these things and it's very easy and you can be cool and answer these and these research questions. Now, that's actually like, it would be like starting a language course by showing poetry, postmodernist poetry to students when they cannot introduce themselves and ask for directions. So, and I recognize this as a bit of a challenge in the British educational system, which my sort of critical take on is that there's a huge emphasis on student satisfaction. And I think we're sometimes a little bit obsessed with that by sort of almost idolizing the National Student Survey and all these kind of figures. And of course, students do not experience pleasure learning statistics because it requires this investment and is something that's usually not the core of their interest in criminology classes. But notwithstanding that, I don't think it's our goal to pretend that like it's going to be pleasurable or to dump down the material so that it becomes pleasurable, but rather be very open and very honest about the fact that this can be a pain at times, but the pain is worth the gain.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I think, and I absolutely agree with you. And I agree with that in teaching and learning more broadly, that being open and honest and transparent about what students can expect from a module, and also being open and honest and transparent about how you are going to deliver it and why you are delivering it in that way, so that even if it isn't a student's cup of tea, at least they understand the value of what they're doing. So I may not enjoy it or it may not be my interest, but I understand this is valuable because that's been explained to me, and that's why I know I need to do this. I think also as well, in terms of the fear element, it does make sense because increasingly I think we're seeing a fear of the kind of absolutes. You either get it right or you get it wrong, and if you get it wrong, you're a failure. And I think when students and indeed anybody thinks about maths or scientific related subjects, there are definitive answers, and you either get it wrong or you get it right. And so I think when students perhaps are presented with modules that have some kind of mathematical feel, there is that automatic fear of, I'm going to get it wrong, or if I get it wrong, that's it, I've failed completely. So it's almost like it gives people kind of those flashbacks of however they engaged with and experienced mathematics in school. For some people, they enjoyed it, and it's like Marmite, you like it or you don't, and I think it automatically kind of imports those feelings. So it does make sense, and I don't think it's irrational. Ian, is there anything you want to add before I come to John?
So it seems like David and Tom said something really fundamental and the key stuff. But for me, when I started teaching in the first week, because these kind of stuff we cannot fix it like quickly. So anyway, my role is delivering all the material within 10 weeks efficiently. So I try to think about how can I deliver this one more efficiently and how to make this class more valuable to the student. For instance, of course, it's really important students have sort of background. For instance, it's not easy to teach regression analysis to a student who does not know what is slope, what is intercept. So they don't have a basic understanding about the mathematics. Obviously, if I started talking about the statistical term, they feel really, okay, I can understand, because the term itself is very, it's not the daily term. So, and then if you miss a certain part, you miss the remaining part of the statistics skills. So students feel more anxious, and then students will be really worried because if they miss the first or second part of the class. So always try to give us some, like, let them know this is, you're capable and you can do this, and then give us some confidence at the start of beginning class. And then I try to explain why we are doing this rather than how to do that. So obviously, if I can teach them the equation, if I can teach them all the statistical knowledge or mathematical knowledge behind the simple t-test or chi-square, that would be amazing. But as the time is very limited, I need to deliver why we are doing this, why this is important, how well we can understand. And then another thing that link with David and comment is that it's because I got the statistical education in other country in America. So for instance, master or PhD, there's a 2 years coursework, 3 or 4 years of coursework. But here in UK, normally master students or PhD students, they only have 1 year teaching. So which means, for instance, in other country, there's a beginner level statistic, intermediate level statistic, advanced level statistic. But here in UK, we have to squeeze everything in 1 semester. So try to deliver all the basic stuff in 1 semester. So it must be quite a lot for some students who doesn't have a good understanding about the statistic. So we kind of understand this. So that's the reason why Tom and I, we in our module, we try to give like some prep session. So give them a kind of overview, what you will expect. So give a clear, we share the clear goal, and we share clear what we are expecting from you. This is kind of, we expect from you, this is, you have to meet at this standard. So we have to clearly set up the module's goal, and so students have a better understanding about what they need to do in the module.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ian. And I think that's really interesting, making that international comparison, because it really does feel so compressed when it comes to the kind of the delivery. John, did you have a point you wanted to make before I'm going to compress my last couple of questions into one, because I'm mindful of time. So John.
Yeah, thanks. Just very quickly. And reflecting on my experience of teaching this in the past, I mean, I don't think you want to get across the view that all students are difficult to teach to and are antithetical towards. There's always diversity within the student population, and some people really get it, really interested, and are really easy to teach or a pleasure to teach, and indeed push you. And then perhaps there's, in my experience, there's more reward about somebody who has initially negative attitudes towards stats and quants, but then starts to see the light and starts to kind of move towards embracing it towards the end of the thing. And then there will always be a group of people who it's just not their cup of tea, and then maybe they have attitudes that get in the way, they try hard, they find it difficult, they don't enjoy it. But the challenge, I think, is always teaching to those different types of students, within the thing. And the other issue I think has always been for me is the support needs. You want to, as a good pedagogue, to be giving good feedback, and you want to be giving as much support as is possible. But it's not possible, in my experience, to give the amount of support that some students feel they need, just because there aren't enough hours in the day. So I've always found that difficult. And the final thing, the difficulty that I think I've experienced with teaching stats is, going back a little to what Tomas was saying before, is that it's difficult to persuade students that they enjoyed the course. Some of them, when they're feeding in their course evaluation surveys at the end. And so you put all this work in, you've done really good work with the students, and then you come out with not always the most glowing sort of student feedback on the course. But when you speak to the same students years later and you invite them back to come and talk to the current cohort, they often say, well, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was one of the most important sets of skills that I took on. And I now see the value in what I did much more than I did then. So that's the sort of the, I don't know, a call for sort of more sort of cohort studies of student interest and feedback, and so we can have a retrospective view as well, I think. But just some thoughts there. But
absolutely, that's a good marketing piece there, John. I liked it. There's something in there. You should have some kind of design a slogan, and we can all wear T-shirts with whatever slogan comes out of that. But I think you're absolutely right, and I think potentially that says something about the way that we evaluate our modules, and that in the same way that there isn't a one size fits all for many things in academia, the way that we evaluate modules isn't necessarily appropriate across the board. So when it comes to those modules that we know are absolutely essential but potentially more challenging and a little bit further out of students' comfort zones, maybe we need to be asking different questions. Not did you like the module, because I think that's quite a flippant question anyway. I want to know more than, I want to know what students got from it. Did you understand, did you meet the aims of what the module was trying to deliver? So I think it's a bit like the whole, do students like you as a teacher? It's like, well, it's not entirely important. It's a nice bonus, but that's not our objective. Our objective is to deliver good quality teaching and learning, and for the students to get out of a module what we've designed them to get out. So I do think the questions there around the design of module evaluation, so that we actually get information that is much more accurately reflective of what we actually need to know, not just do you like it. It's actually, okay, so did you take from it what I designed for you to take from it? You might not have liked it, but this is the most important thing. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to select one element of my questions to ask before I pass over to John for a final few and wrapping up today's podcast. I do feel like we could talk to you for ages, because I think there's going to be so many academic staff who will want to listen to this, because we all have these challenges around delivering quants. So I think we could have extended this one a bit further beyond even. I just want to ask a really, really simple question about assessment strategy. So we've talked a lot about the kind of delivery, and you've talked about some of your delivery methods, which has been really helpful and really interesting. And I just wondered, what about the end product? So what are your assessment strategies, and have they developed over time? Have you had any assessment strategies that either haven't been particularly effective or haven't necessarily worked out the way you wanted them to? And how has that resulted then in developing the kinds of strategies that you use now? And that's to anybody. I can't nominate because I feel too mean doing it. So.
We have different models, and I think the final assessment is slightly different. So I can start with the one I've been teaching so far, which is Introduction to Excel and in Vivo. And each of the weeks after they complete the coursework, they need to do a short test, a very quick test. It's like 5 or 6 minutes tops. And then the aggregated score after completing the 10 weeks of those small tests, that counts 20% of their final score. So we don't really care that much about that 20%, but we want to make sure that they are doing, what we are expecting them to do by the end of the week, so that we can build on that on the following week. And then at the end of the semester, we provide them with 3 different data sets of crime. One is the Crime Study for England and Wales teaching data set, which is open access. Second one is police recorded data available from data.police.uk. And the third one is a sample of tweets published by Greater Manchester Police. So they also have some sort of open social media data. And we attempt to be creative with those data sets. The baseline is you need to use at least 2 of them, and you need to apply at least some of the basic analytical techniques they have learned. Like they need to do an average, they need to calculate standard deviation, and then they can do whatever they want with it and write a 2,000 word final essay with that. And that's assessed not only on whether they do the stats right, but also how they interpret the statistics and how they build on those statistics to answer criminological questions and address criminological problems. And so they also need to build on what they learned in other modules somehow.
And again, I think that's really important because that addresses that issue of it's either right or it's wrong and I've failed. There's that opportunity there that even if perhaps your statistical analysis is not quite right, you might actually be interpreting whatever the result is really well. So it allows students still to be given credit for things that they're doing well and technology areas they're developing. So again, yeah, really important. Anybody else want to chip in on that around assessment strategy?
Eon, do you want to go first?
So
I can wait.
Something linked with David. So I also use a weekly assessment as well. The reason why we're using weekly assessment is that it's really easy tool to chase students' progress. So for instance, if they mark like out of 10, like lower than 5 or 4, something like that constantly, so we can take some action before it makes really trouble later on. For instance, a 3rd week, 4th week, 5th week, and if they keep scoring like a 3 or 4 and they haven't submitted any homework or something like that, always in a statistic education, take the more proactive actions and then take more like early action is important. So we always approach them first and then ask them if you need any help, use this tool, like, come and see me. So that's the reason why we're using a weekly assessment as well.
Yeah, and so I would perhaps just add an overarching comment on that, and that is that the sort of go-to main mode of assessing students in criminology, as far as I know, is the sort of standard essay type of format. So you get one big essay at the end of the semester. And I think this one is very well geared for theoretical courses or criminal justice courses and stuff like that. But it fails remarkably if it would be solely applied as the only mode of assessment for methodological courses. And I think it applies, this failure applies both to quants and quals. Because, as I said, I think this is really about building a skill set where you need to develop this type of muscle memory, in a way, of repeating the stuff, getting your hands dirty with data, be it qualitative or quantitative. And so towards that goal, I think what both David and Eon said, it's really important to get weekly, not only checks up for us, but also to give students the opportunity to practice those skills and to really get that underneath their skin in a way. And then perhaps end the semester with a big overarching assessment that sort of encapsulates all the skills and takes them together in one context. But the smaller building blocks, actually, I would be very much open to giving them much more credit and much more weight for the final grade than we're currently doing, and perhaps doing also much more creative assessments, for instance, oral examinations, sort of trying to just pick the brain of the students on how they would solve standard data-oriented issues on the fly, because that's also a part of applying these methods. Because once you sit down to a computer and you know that the problem you're looking at is predicting a quantitative outcome, you probably know it's linear regression that you want to be using, or some sort of modeling like that. But the crucial part comes before that, when the students have to sort of imagine what the problem is and what would be the best tool to tackle it. And this is something that I feel like just giving them 3,000 words essay falls remarkably short of helping us to assess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not assessing the skill set that you're talking about. You talk about kind of like problem solving activities and thinking using kind of different cognitive skills. And yeah, the one size fits all doesn't apply to assessment in the same way that it doesn't to module evaluation, and again, lots of other things in higher education. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed asking you those questions and hearing your responses. I'm going to hand you back to John just for a final question about EDI and to wrap up today's podcast. So thank you.
Thanks very much, I should say, as he turns off the microphone button. Now, important set of questions finally, and taking advantage of Ian in particular being here. Ian's had an EDI brief within the Department of Criminology more generally for a couple of years now, and has been doing some really important work across our programs. I just wanted to leave with a final set of questions really about what EDI means within the teaching of quants and statistics. Are there any particular issues that we need to think about within the teaching of quants, or are these generic issues, you know, about respecting and teaching to the diversity within our student populations, or making sure we have diversity within the people who teach criminology, or thinking about the perspectives and examples and data sets that we use? Are there any particular EDI issues within the teaching of quants?
Yeah, I think you cover everything in your question. So that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. So
that was a question, by the way.
No, that was a great summary actually. So we try to create a more inclusive and welcoming learning environment, obviously. So students all like. So the students, we understand they have a different background, different understanding about the mathematics and the statistical knowledge. So we try to make more inclusive and welcoming environment. To make that environment, there's several action plan that we are doing. The first one, we are developing a teaching material more inclusive and more accessible to the students who have a various background. And for instance, with students, we are developing a material so students can work with local people and the local issues, so they got more interest in, and then they feel like how this data really can make changes really in our society. For instance, there is some like trauma center here in Manchester. So we are working with them and collaborating, getting data from them, and then we try to put the data set in our teaching material. And also we are working with the head of EDI in our university. So for instance, university itself has a lot of crime issue, for instance, poverty crime and stealing computer, or bicycle theft, or sexual crime, or race discrimination, all those types of crime. We try to make those those data in our material, so students feel more okay. I can make some changes, positive changes from the data set that I'm using. So, and another thing is that that also linked with student social responsibility perspective of quantitative method teaching. And other stuff is that the minor stuff, but we try not to use the example. Any student who has different background to feel uncomfortable. So we are incorporating a non-Westernized context. For instance, the data from India, the data from Bangladesh, so students have more understanding about the data source from other countries. So it's not like limited to the work in the UK or in the Western context.
Great, and that's a really full and I think inspiring sort of set of answers there about how it's possible really to take EDI and make it live within a particular type of unit. And long may it continue, and we expose our students to the more representative sort of diversity of people and issues and data from around the world.
I just wanted to do a bit of name dropping at the very end before we wrap up, but I think we would be a little bit unfair if we didn't do that, because I think the university has invested quite a lot in big group of colleagues that are working in those units. John said at the beginning of the podcast that all this framework was originally developed mainly by Juanjo Medina and Riga Solimosi. But we have other colleagues that are working with us, and I think that's also a message for if there's a head of school from another university listening to this podcast, you need a group of people working on those modules to make it work, right? And so aside from Tom and Eon, Nico Trachtenberg and Joanna Hill and Aisling McLaughlin, and she was teaching with us a few years ago, Laura Buil, and John Schut, he also mentioned he taught in these modules a few years ago, and also quite a lot of TAs that are teaching in our modules at the moment. And so we are here representing a bigger group of people. Great.
Great point. Thanks very much for making that, David. As ever, you need institutional backing and support, and you need a critical mass of good people all pushing in the same direction, I think, to get things done and to change things. So thanks ever so much. We've had a really good and varied sort of kickabout of lots of really important issues there, into what I think may turn into two podcasts, perhaps.
No, it could be an epic feature-length one.
It could.
But
Yeah.
for those who have got the power to push on through.
Interval in the middle for refreshments.
I can actually edit in a little interval. Yeah, take a 5-minute break here.
But thanks ever so much to everybody. And I think the many people listening to this who will a lot of things that are being said will resonate, and will take inspiration from what you've done and continue to do. So thanks very much. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. It was a major pleasure.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone.